What's going on, everybody? I remember as a kid, we would go up to Lake Tahoe and go snow skiing, and there was like this rivalry. It was like skiers and snowboarders. It's not that they didn't like each other, it's that they just kind of like stayed in their own little packs. And then I started driving and I started noticing how motorcycle drivers, guys that are riding on their motorcycle, they have that like little wave that they give to other guys on motorcycles. And it's interesting with card collecting because a lot of vintage collectors kind of just hang out with vintage collectors, and modern collectors just hang out with modern collectors. And it's not really like there's a rivalry, but it's a separation. And I don't think it needs to be that way. And I think that it's interesting because so much of modern collecting has roots back from vintage collecting. So much of what happens in the card market right now started with vintage cards. Like, is there really a need to get a pack fresh card graded? I don't really think that there are very minor differences. I mean, most of those pack fresh cards are going to get a 9 or a 10, but they get them graded because that's kind of what you do. In the late 50s, when card sizes got standardized, they're still standardized today in that same size. The roots go back to vintage cards in the late 50s. Companies like Topps Heritage, they have a lot of throwback cards. A lot of Topps inserts are throwback cards. There are modern guys on T206 style cards that are available to collectors now. And it's interesting that with as many roots as modern collecting has from vintage collecting, there's still this separation. Now, something caught my eye this week. I watched a ton of coverage from the National, and not being there made me probably watch even more than had I been there. And just like the rest of us, I have quite a few channels on YouTube that I subscribe to. And so I was watching as channel after channel was posting things that they were buying at the National, and things that were hot at the National, and meetups at the National. And needless to say, I was pretty bummed out that I wasn't there, but I was super excited for so many of these collectors, so many people that I've gotten to know, and to see what they've been buying. And something just jumped at me. And the thing that jumped at me is I felt like time and time again on the vintage YouTube channels that I watch, because I watch modern YouTube collecting channels as well, but on the vintage channels, something kept coming up that seemed a little bit different, or at least a little bit more frequent than it did before. So the thing that's interesting to me is it feels like modern collecting is starting to actually affect vintage collectors. And you say, well, how could that be? The cards were already printed. The cards were already made. I get that. But there are a couple of things that jumped out at me from this year's National that was a frequent theme over and over. 2 items that I think are really coming from modern collecting. I really do think that modern collecting is starting to affect what vintage collectors are interested in. And check these out. Check these 2 items out. And I'm going to show you some video from some really cool YouTube channels that if you're not subscribed to yet, I hope that you will subscribe to them, on things that really made a light bulb go off for me this weekend when watching all of that vintage content from the National.
So the first thing is autographs on vintage cards.
So I really feel like a very common theme that people were chasing were vintage cards that were autographed by the player. That was not a thing for years and years and years. You left cards unautographed. In fact, it would devalue the card. But I saw many, many times over the course of my hours of YouTube viewing, people chasing autographed vintage cards, which I get, they're cool. They're rare. And some people have been doing it for a long time, and some people have just started increasing their interest in it over the last couple of years. But that theme seemed to come up a lot, and I have to wonder, is that a result of the chase cards and modern cards being the autographed ones? Or is it just a coincidence, which it could be too?
So one of the biggest channels in the hobby is Sports Card Investor. And Jeff Wilson here is negotiating a deal on the first day of the National to buy a 41 Joe DiMaggio that's autographed. And he's going back and forth, and he's consulting other people, and he ends up buying it for $22,000. And it's a sweet card, but there can't be many of those out there. The next one is a collector's dream, Orlando. Everybody loves Orlando. He's such a great guy. And he bought an Orlando Cepeda rookie that's autographed with the inscription Baby Bull, which is Orlando Cepeda's nickname. And, you know, Orlando has an awesome collection of vintage stuff. And I know he collects a lot of autographs. And a lot of those autographs are on different pictures and things, but this was a cool pickup on a card. Then I got Mike Moynihan, baseball collector, really well-known channel, really well-known person in the hobby. And Mike is going through, bought a ton of vintage cards signed by Hall of Famers. And I mean, he has a whole stack here of Hall of Fame autographs on vintage cards. And he had some other really cool pickups. All these guys did. But I mean, look at all those autographs. And then he also got a Robin Yount because he has a Hall of Fame rookie autograph collection. And he picked this card up too. Again, I really encourage you to watch all of these guys' channels, subscribe to them, and check out their pickups from the National. They're all terrific. Love them. And then we got Mike from Junk Wax Hero. He picked up an 89 Upper Deck Griffey autograph. Now, when we think of vintage, I wouldn't put this in the vintage category, but it's certainly not like a modern card. It's not a pack-pulled autograph. But he picked up this really cool card too. Again, a card that's autographed. And then back to Jeff Wilson again. He's got some deep pockets apparently, because he also went back and found another dealer and bought a couple of Michael Jordan autographs on cards. One is a Jordan second-year card. The other one's a few years after that. But he bought these two cards for $9,500. And I just felt like every time I turned around and was watching videos from the National of people picking up cards, they all were autographs on vintage cards. The next thing is ultra rare buying.
So the other thing is, it seems like there has been a surge in interest for some of those ultra rare cards. Now, for years and years and years, it was about the Topps and the Bowmans and the Gaudis and the tobacco cards. It was about the mainstream cards. But it seems to me like there's been a surge, like there's been a big increase in some of those ultra rare, kind of, some people call them oddball cards, regional cards, cards that were not widely produced, which is interesting. And is it a result of the low pop, low serial numbered cards of modern collecting? Maybe, maybe not. But it does seem to me, at least, like those ultra rare cards have seen an increase in interest from the average, regular run-of-the-mill collector like me.
So a card I saw featured a few times in videos was this 68 Clemente 3D card. And when you look at the pop report on PSA, there are not very many of them. It is a rare card. And here's a video of Theo from Clemente Collector. And again, if you're not following Theo, I'd encourage you to do that. But he's taken us through the process of his friend buying one of these 68 Roberto Clemente 3D cards, and the deal's a $50,000 deal. And he ends up doing a trade where he gives up a Babe Ruth, the 53 mantle, and quite a bit of money in order to get the card. And here he is showing off his new pickup. And it just seems, it's surprising to me the amount that cards like that are going for. You got this 54 Red Heart Mickey Mantle card. And, I mean, it's a cool looking card. But when you look at the prices of what it was going for 10 years ago, it was like $1,000 card in an 8, when we're talking 10 years ago. And then you look at the prices now, and it's $5,500, $7,500, $7,500, $5,700 in an 8. The price has gone crazy. Now, I know all cards have gone up. I get that. But look at these prices on recent auctions and sales on eBay for potato chip cards and Red Heart cards versus the 54 Bowman. It's more expensive than the 54 Bowman.
What do you think? Is this a coincidence? Is it just a coincidence that I just, noticed this and these types of collecting have always been going on? Or does it seem like the premium for vintage cards with vintage autographs is growing? The interest and the demand of vintage cards with vintage autographs is on the rise. Or has it always been high and I just didn't notice it, which is possible. It just seemed like every time I turned around, there was a vintage collector picking up an old card, whether it be a rookie card or maybe, just an older card that had an autograph on it. It seems to me like that's on the rise. And one of the reasons I think it's on the rise is because they're rare. Again, when I was a kid, you didn't dare get a rookie card signed. That would almost devalue the card. And as a result of people not doing that, now it's very rare to have a Babe Ruth card with a Babe Ruth autograph on it, or a Mickey Mantle card with a Mickey Mantle autograph. Or as you saw in the video, a Joe DiMaggio card signed by Joe DiMaggio. Those are very, very rare because people just didn't do it because it was looked down upon. It was like autographs are for autographs. They go on pictures and balls and things. And cards were for cards. But with the increase of autographs on modern cards, the chase cards when you're opening modern packs is to pull a card with an autograph. That's the best card. A rare card that's autographed. And the only way to do that with vintage cards is to buy a card that's been authenticated, that's already been signed, because a lot of those players are now gone. Is that a new phenomenon? Is that not a new phenomenon, but is that on the rise like it seemed to be at this year's National? Because that's how it appeared to me. And what about those kind of rare abstract oddball cards? The ones that for years it seemed like people were like, no, I collect the Topps cards, I collect the base cards, I collect the mainstream cards. That's what I collect. I collect the Bowman cards or the Gowdy cards or the tobacco cards. I don't collect the off-the-wall, oddball, rare regional cards. But it seems like the rare regional cards are becoming the chase cards. it seems like modern collecting might be rubbing off on vintage collecting in the fact that the ultra rare, it doesn't have to be the best looking card or the best name brand card. It's the rare card. We don't have 1 of 1s or 5 of 5s or 10 of 10s in vintage cards. The only way you can have that is for it to be a super rare regional card. And it seems like the demand for those and the price of those is currently skyrocketing. Why weren't the dog food cards of Mickey Mantle in super high demand 20 years ago and they are now? To me, it seems like it might have something to do with the fact that modern cards are all about the low pop count, the low numbered cards, and people want the super rare stuff in vintage as well. And some of you were saying, are you kidding me? It's always been about the rare cards with vintage stuff. It's like the Honus Wagner and the Eddie Plank T206 cards. The reason that those got super, super valuable is because they're super, super rare. And that's true. I get that. And the error cards, remember the old error card thing back in the 80s and 90s? It was because it was super rare. You know, the Bill Ripken card had like all these different variations. And it was all these different variations had high value because they were super rare. But it just seems to me like there's kind of an increased demand for vintage cards that are autographed. And there seems to be an increased demand for the super rare card, even if it's not made by a mainstream manufacturer. That's one of my biggest takeaways from the National. Am I late to the party? Has this been around for several years and I didn't notice? Or is this a newer increase in demand? Where do you see this going? What do you think? And is there something else with vintage cards that you're noticing that is a big increase in demand that wasn't there 10 or 20 years ago that might be getting its influence from modern cards? And lastly, is that the reason that there's an increase? Do you think it's the vintage collector seeing the polls and the interest and the demand for autographed cards and the super rare cards, and now it's encouraging and rubbing off on the vintage collectors that they want the autographed and the super rare, the ultra rare cards as well? Tell me what you think about it. I know there have been some collectors out there for a very long time that have been collecting these things. But is the demand for those items growing? And if so, why do you think it's growing now rather than 10 or 20 years ago? Let me know what you think.